I am sorry.
No.
All right. She's been an Indiana educator with over 15 years serving at all levels within Indiana public education. Her comprehensive experience includes 2 years at the state level within the Indiana Department of Education, IDOE, Superintendent's Cabinet. Amanda led the charge from the General Assembly from 2017 to 2019 to develop a 6-year statewide STEM strategic plan outlining Indiana's objectives for STEM education. This extensive project focused on providing equitable STEM access for all students, building teacher and leadership STEM capacity, and connecting school districts and communities with business and industry partners in order to collaboratively develop and implement local plans to meet the current and future technical workforce pipeline demands. While serving the state of Indiana, McCammon also oversaw PK through 16 content curriculum standards and professional learning for the IDOE. Amanda currently serves as the Indiana STEM ecosystem lead while also supporting educators and youth as a national education consultant focusing on equitable, high-quality education for all. So what I would like to say as we begin, if you would like to engage in the chat, please do so, but please chat on the Whova app. That is what I will be monitoring, and I will try to help Amanda make sure she doesn't miss any chat questions or observations you'd like to share. And at the end, there's going to be a survey. Once you do the survey, that will trigger the PGP points. Okay, Amanda, let's take it away.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Diane. Well, welcome, Jessica and Deb. It looks like we've got a pretty small room today for now. I know yesterday I was popping in and out of rooms, so we may have a couple people join us midstream that are kind of popping back and forth, but no worries. So I appreciate that intro. I'm Amanda, and good morning. To me, I know it's 11, almost lunchtime, but I'm still drinking my coffee, as you see. So I appreciate that intro. Just like you heard, I'm an Indian educator, have been my entire career, and have served in lots of different capacities, both in the classroom as a building leader, district leader, and then at the state office under Dr. McCormick, doing a variety of different things, but also across the state served in rural, urban, and suburban areas. You name it, I've been there with like the socioeconomic status, different types of communities and families. So just done a lot of different things with a lot of different communities and school districts and families. So great experiences, and I feel like I have a pretty good handle on where we are and where our educators, administrators, and the struggles that we face because of those experiences. So I get it. I know the struggles you face, and more specifically, the struggles that we face as we try to do what we need to do on a daily basis, whether it's in the classroom, in a building, in a district, in your community, whatever it is that you're trying to provide, the struggles that you face when it comes to trying to use the resources that you have, the fiscal resources specifically, to do what it is that you need to do or want to do. So that's going to be really our focus today. But to get started, I just want you to think about, what would you do with $1 million? And today we're really not going to be talking about millions, we're going to be talking about billions. But I thought it would be an interesting little activity to, in the chat, if you had $1 million, what would you do with it personally? And you can dream and scheme as big as you want. And then also think about it from your work perspective. So whether you're a district leader, a classroom leader, a building leader, whatever that is, whatever you're doing within education, what would you do with $1 million? And I'm going to play a little tune for you while we add that to the chat.
If I had $1 million, if I had $1 million, well, I'd buy you a house. I would buy you a house. And if I had $1 million, if I had $1 furniture for your house, maybe a nice Chesterfield or an ottoman. And if I had $1 million, if I had $1 million, well, I'd buy you a K car, a nice reliant automobile. And if I had $1 million, I'd buy your love. If I had $1 million, I'd build a tree fort in our yard. If I had $1 million, you couldn't help doing me that hard. If I had $1 million, maybe we could put a little tiny fridge in there somewhere. We could just go up there and hang it, like open the fridge and stuff. Probably food's laid out for us, little pre-wrapped sausages and things. They have pre-wrapped sausages, but they don't have pre-wrapped bacon. Can you blame them? Yeah. If I had $1 million, if I had $1 million, well, I'd buy you a fur coat, but not a real fur coat. That's cruel. And if I had...
Okay, so I love that song. And that, if you didn't know, is Bare Naked Ladies. I know it's a kind of a strange name for a band, but Bare Naked Ladies, $1 million. So lots of great options put in the chat box. I agree, traveling 100%. Creating hiring as personal aid for my classroom, absolutely, always beneficial. Lots of travel on here. I said travel for me and everyone in my classroom because I think it's such a benefit, especially for our students that don't get that opportunity to travel. So travel was definitely at the top of my list as well. So I know that was not the country song I'm going to talk about, but I'm sure you guys have heard that country song. How does it go? I can't think of the artist, but it's everyone says money can't buy happiness, but it can buy me a boat and it can buy me a truck to pull it. If you've not heard it, look it up. But so money, we're going to talk about what money can do, what the money that we have out there right now, both from a state and federal perspective. And there's so much out there right now. It is likely that right now is the most money we may ever see in education. Now, unfortunately, it's a result of all the terrible things that have been going on in the world for the last year and a half or so. But we're not talking millions, we're talking billions of dollars overall, and not just overall from the feds, but for Indiana specifically. Excuse me. There are some stipulations, of course, as any federal funds or state funds come with, but it's really pretty wide open, and there's lots of opportunity for schools and districts and classrooms, teachers, everyone to think creatively and to think broadly about how we use those funds to really change the way we teach and the way our kiddos learn in schools. As districts are currently making plans for one of the fund opportunities we're going to talk about, which is ESSER 3, those are due at the end of the month. So our districts are working on those right now. They're making plans. But as they make those plans, it's really important for our voices to be heard with those teams to talk about how do we make holistic, sustainable changes and provide embedded support for our students, for our staff development, for our families. We want to really harness these dollars to do some great, innovative things that are going to allow for long-term systemic change. So we need to address the learning loss experience from the pandemic. We need to address equity, diversity, and inclusion. We need to look deeper at our instructional practices. We need to look at long-term, sustainable, ongoing development of our educators at all levels. So we put a lot of professional development on our teachers. It's a great thing. There's a lot. We ask our teachers to do a lot. And I'm talking about professional development for teachers, but I'm also talking about professional development for our leaders. Unfortunately, we have a lot of great leaders out there, but unfortunately, because there's so much on their plates, sometimes things are not being developed that really need some additional focus. So how do we develop them and use these funds to really embed and sustain practices of professional development to make them not just good leaders of the building and of the crises that they deal with every day, but of really being strong instructional leaders that can drive change in all aspects. So we're looking to change the equation. We're looking to develop long-term outcomes that we not only need, but that we want, and we want to dream and scheme big. So this is really where STEM comes into play. And that's what we're going to dive in today, is how you kind of look at the STEM and what you can do with STEM, harnessing those dollars. Just real quick to touch on the slide that you're looking at, you can see the difference in the overall per pupil funding just from 2018, pre-COVID, obviously. And then there were 3 what we call COVID or ESSER fund packages released from the federal government down to the states. And we're going to talk about this in more detail today. But you can see how that per pupil, the total amount increases, and then the per pupil amount just gradually increases. So from 2018, having just under $980 per pupil is what that federal funding amount was, versus now, after the 3rd round that your districts are wrapping up, finishing and for the state of Indiana, they put it into their title application, but they're finishing that up, they'll get approximately $22.80 per pupil. Now that's the federal numbers, not the state numbers, which our allocations per district look a little bit different, but that's a good measure to look at how much growth we've seen over the last couple of years, post-pandemic especially, of that per pupil amount. So like I said, this is where STEM comes in. But before we can really talk about STEM, we need to know what STEM we're talking about. STEM can be transformative in teaching and learning in tons and tons of ways, but we really have to make sure we're talking about the same thing. So take just a minute here to put into the chat box, when I say STEM, what do you think we're talking about? What is it that comes to mind for you when we say STEM? Go ahead and add that to the chat box. Okay, as you're adding those comments to the chat box there, and I will have to ask Diane to let me know if there's comments in the Whova app chat box, because I don't want to have to toggle back and forth between those 2 pieces. So if you can just dump those, Diane, any comments into the Zoom chat, because that's easier for me to monitor and respond to, then that would be great. And I'll take a look at those also at the end. So what is STEM? We got to have the same definition if we're going to talk about STEM. So a lot of people, when they think of STEM, they think of science, technology, engineering, and math, right? The acronym. But there's so many acronyms out there that it's really kind of become this almost volatile, like, battle of the acronyms, right? So you have, and I'm an arts person. I love art. I do art on my own. So I don't disagree with making it, adding an A for the arts and making it STEAM. Lots of people agree with that. You can add entrepreneurship and invention in there. So STEAMIE, I've seen that one, and make it steamy. So STREAM, there's another example there for STREAM, which I think in both of those, one it's reading and another one it's robotics. So lots of ways you can do it, right? So, but we have to keep in mind that it's not about the acronym. We don't have to create this environment of, well, I want to add the arts, or I want to add reading, or I want to add what you want. Okay, there's so many things you can add. It's not about the acronym. It's not even about the content that we're talking about today when we talk about STEM. Someone that I won't mention his name, but you would know him if I mentioned his name. Very well known, actually runs a curriculum company, and also sat on my board when I was at the State Department of Ed, so you might be able to figure it out. Great man. He made a comment one time when he was presenting in a session for me on a panel, and we were talking about this idea of acronyms and this battle of the acronyms for STEM. What is STEM? And he actually sat on my STEM council as well when I was at the State Department of Education in the development of that 6-year strategic plan for the state. And he said, if we keep, if we make it about the content when we talk about STEM, So is it science? Is it social studies? Is it reading? Is it math? Like, what are those content components? We make it about the content, and we make STEM about the acronym. So what are we embedding into that acronym? And we just are going to keep adding and changing the letters. Eventually, all we're going to end up with is what we started with, which is SCHOOL, school, or something like this.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone, the Great Depression, passed the, anyone, the tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which anyone raised or lowered, raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics, voodoo economics.
So we all remember that movie, right? Ferris Bueller's Day Off. That's what we're trying to stay away from. We're trying to stay away from thinking about, is it social studies? Is it reading? Is it math? Is it science? When we talk about STEM today. Not talking about content. So today when we talk about STEM, we are talking about this transformative way of teaching and learning. We're talking about a process that can be used with existing funding opportunities we're going to talk about today to really make improvement. It's a process. STEM's a process. It's about asking questions. It's about investigating, doing root cause analysis, developing a new understanding, and making those sustainable actions to permanently change mindsets and then improve outcomes. So that's what we're talking about today when we talk about STEM. So now that we have a common definition of what we're talking about today when we talk about STEM, we're going to touch a little bit on how this session is going to benefit you today. So here are some questions that we are going to answer today in this session. And I want you to keep in mind that this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is just a 45-minute to an hour session, and it's just really an introduction. It's just to get you to start thinking about some of these things, wet your whistle, so to speak, and get ready to take the next step or figure out what is it that I need to be doing next, regardless of whether you're a teacher in a classroom, you're a building or a district administrator, whatever your role is. But we can't dive deep today. However, STEM Synergy, which is kind of the title of the support that I offer within Keep Indiana Learning. So this is all through the STEM ecosystem work that I've done. We are now falling under Keep Indiana Learning. So here in July, if you go to the Keep Indiana Learning site, you'll see a STEM Synergy page that you can go to. We provide additional support to educators, schools, districts across the state of Indiana. And then we'll talk a little bit specifics about what we can offer through Keep Indiana Learning later on in the slides. But these are really the focuses of today, is how does STEM link to the state and what the state says are the learning recovery goals and objectives within their plan. How does it fit within funding opportunities that are out there right now? And then how can we support your efforts moving forward? So another important consideration as we dive into this today is to know your role. Like I said, even though this session is really for anyone and everyone, we had a focus on administrators. I know on the Whova app it shows, and leadership. But if you are sitting in a different kind of role, even if you're an administrator, you have to know your role within the bigger picture. So sometimes in these sessions, you do like a who's in the room activity. And I posted a poll question earlier about, are you a decision maker? Are you an influencer, etc. And that was really to get you thinking about, what's my role? Not my title. This isn't about my title or my position, but what's my role in this? So I call this a RACI chart. Some people call it RACI. But it's a great concept to use as it relates to our discussion today, but then also something you can use in lots and lots of ways, whether it's in your classroom or in staff meetings, et cetera, projects that you do across the district. So it's a really important activity to consider as you step into this, that to keep in mind that it's not about your title or position, but it's about your role in funding STEM, making decisions about funding STEM, et cetera. So just take a minute to kind of look at this and think, where would I fall when I'm thinking about these funding opportunities and trying to harness them for STEM in some capacity? Am I the one responsible? Am I going to be held accountable for the tasks to be completed? Or am I more in the C or the I in terms of I need to provide information and be consulted on these decisions, or informed, whether you're being informed or you're the informer? So that may be the role of some people in the room today, of just gathering this information and being like, you know what, I need to ask these questions of my district leadership of how they're allocating these funds, and can I do these things I want to do with some of these funds that we have available to us as it relates to STEM. Something good to think about. So we talked about how STEM for us today is not about content. And this aligns to the State Department of Education. This is actually a snippet from the 6-year STEM strategic plan from the Department of Ed, which was in 2019 is when that was released. And again, this just reiterates that we are talking about, even though they mention the integration of disciplines, it's really more than that. It's about deploying problem solving and inquiry-based approaches. It's integrated, it's hands-on, it's developing problem solving skills. It's giving students the ability to gain practical understanding of concepts rather than just memorizing things from a textbook or facts. It creates and invokes creativity, innovative skills. It encourages persistence and determination of our students, and it allows them to develop that resiliency when they encounter a hurdle, and it teaches them to fail, but then recover from that failure. It also develops that outside of the box creative thinking and encourages that social collaboration and teamwork that we really want to embed into our classrooms. So just reiterating, more than content, even per the state plan, it's really more than just content. And per the state plan, there are 2 key components of evidence-based effective STEM instruction. And those are problem or project-based learning, and oftentimes you hear that as PBL, or inquiry-based instruction. So first, we're going to hit on project or problem-based PBL, is what a lot of people call it, and what that is. So if you want to add in the chat box, when you think of PBL, what it is that you think of, that'd be great. Oftentimes, people shy away, at least in today's world. Oftentimes, when we say PBL, people are like, oh my gosh, if I hear PBL one more time, right? Kind of like with the STEM acronym. If I hear it one more time, it's everywhere. But you have to kind of let go of that, because it can be so much. It's really a pedagogy, and it's supposed to anchor the teaching of the disciplinary contents in the context of solving real world problems and challenges. So typically, whether you call it problem-based or project-based learning, PBL, whatever you want to call it, this pedagogy, it spans several weeks. It can span a week, it can span several weeks for more like a unit of instruction. And then it's delivered as an integrated manner with various disciplines. Oftentimes people think of science, technology, engineering, math as those disciplines, but it really can be any disciplines that you choose. And those disciplines then, and integrating the weeks of instruction and integrating the content matter into that of whatever discipline, is to create and show those authentic connections for students. So problem or challenge is introduced on the first day of the unit, and then it's followed by the teaching of content through discussion, investigation, exploration, research, and then the students apply their knowledge in that real time to develop their potential solutions. Lots and lots of available PBL, high quality resources out there. Definitely something we can provide support on the back end. We'll talk about through STEM Synergy. There is something that I want to cover though. A lot of people get confused because it's called project-based learning or problem-based learning, PBL. They get confused about, well, I'm doing a project, so I'm doing PBL. Projects and PBL are completely different things. There's a lot of confusion there. Most educators do projects, but not necessarily project-based learning. So we're going to show a little clip here of what the difference is.
Today, we're going to start a new project.
Teachers and their students have been doing projects since forever. More and more are doing project-based learning. So what's the difference?
That's a great question. Let's start off by reviewing.
Projects are typically limited in scope and duration. They're a good way for students to work with content they've already learned.
Flip to the paper that says sundial.
In project-based learning, students learn through the project.
Interesting.
They address a real-world problem, a driving question, one that can't be Googled and has no single right answer.
We were talking about how can we prepare for Atlanta's change in weather.
Students have voice and choice in PBL, some input into how they'll answer the driving question.
Does anybody think they might have some ideas?
So they gain ownership of their learning.
So those questions led to our investigation.
They collaborate in a process of sustained inquiry, lasting more than a few days.
We've got a whole lot of work to do.
They reflect on their learning through discussions, formative assessments, and critiques of their peers' work.
We are going to take a look at one of your friends' work today.
And then revise their work based on those reflections.
Okay, there we go. We got it. You can start by.
The final product is shared with an audience beyond the classroom. Maybe that's professionals in a related field,
I appreciated how thoughtfully you responded.
or it could be the kids in the class next door. When students spend an hour exploring the 4 forces of flight by crafting a Mars lander out of paper, that's a project. When they spend a month simulating a Mars landing, analyzing the math and physics at work, and discussing their work with real aerospace engineers,
And it sounds like you've done a little bit of testing to see if that works.
that's project-based learning.
Capiche?
Research shows that rigorous PBL can result in higher engagement and deeper content knowledge.
Keep it up, okay?
Learn more about project-based learning at edutopia.org.
Okay, so, all right, there we go. So the other side of it, other than PBL, is that inquiry-based instruction. So we're still talking about what is it that we're talking about when we talk about STEM, right? So we know specifically when we go back and think about how we're going to use these funds, what we're talking about. So inquiry-based instruction, again, is a pedagogy, but it's delivered lessons on a daily basis in all areas, all content areas, all disciplines, all levels of education. And it starts with that teacher presenting students with a question to explore, or the students can develop their own question. Then they investigate the question. They look for evidence. They gather evidence through research. They explore and formulate their explanations to describe their findings based on the evidence or data collected. And then they connect those explanations to their knowledge and current understandings of the discipline. So they're taking that problem, researching, exploring, and then connecting it back to their learning and the discipline that they're in, or the content that they're in terms of what course or what subject area they're looking at. It's really about the connection to that discipline. One of the things that educators use a lot in inquiry-based learning, and it's a great way to connect challenges of today, is through what's called grand challenges. And if you do a quick Google search for grand challenges, lots of things will come up. But grand challenges are really that inquiry-based learning and how you can connect it to your classroom. It's really kind of a family of initiatives, and it fosters the innovation to solve key global health and development problems. Excuse me. Each initiative is an experiment within the use of these challenges to focus innovation on making an actual impact. So I definitely check that out. These are just a couple examples, but that's one great way to embed that inquiry-based learning into your classroom or school. So typically we would take a little brain and body break. I'm going to shorten this version, but we are going to take one. So please stretch, grab a drink or a snack, and use the restroom, and then we will come right back. I was going to run the whole song, but it's a little long, so we will just take about a minute break here.
I work all night, I work all day to pay the bills I have to pay. And still there never seems to be a single penny left for me. Don't sit down there. That's too bad. It's broken. In my dreams, I have a plan. If I got the LLP man, I wouldn't have to work it all. I'd fool around and have a ball. rich man's world. Money, 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 always sunny in a rich man's world. Whoa. All the things I could do if I had a little money. It's a rich man's world. It's a rich man's world. A man like that is hard to find. I can't get him off my mind. And it's sad. And if he happens to be free, I bet he wouldn't fancy me. That's too bad. So I must leave. I have to go. Till I'm thinking I'm not full. I'm in a fortune in a game. My life will never be the same. Money, money, must be funny in a rich man's world.
Okay, great. So welcome back. I grabbed a little bit more coffee. Hopefully took a little break. So we're going to move on now to talking about, now that we know what STEM is and how that connects, how do we connect that to jobs and to funding? So one of the opportunities to align to the state initiatives, whether it's through the Department of Ed, the Governor's Workforce Cabinet, Department of Workforce Development, the Commission for Higher Ed, or the Governor's Office, is really through those current funding streams for STEM. But it's through jobs, it's through workforce development, it's through employability skills, it's through CCR, college and career readiness. We know that not all young people have access to a strong STEM education. And recent data indicates between 2017 and 2027 that STEM jobs will grow by 13% compared to 9% for all other non-STEM jobs. Also, on average, the STEM jobs have higher earning power. The median earnings for STEM jobs are about $40 an hour versus $19 an hour for non-STEM jobs. So it's really important for us to consider, how do we tie what STEM is, funding opportunities, to what the needs of these state agencies are even saying is a focus, which is the outcome after school. So college and career readiness, employability, workforce development, because STEM's where it's at. So you can connect all of those pieces together, especially with the requirement from the state legislature and the DOE on employability skills standards and embedding those grade band standards into your teaching within your classrooms. We know also that the achievement and opportunity gaps are persistent across socioeconomic, geographic, racial, ethnic, and gender groups. And this is also where STEM can step in to assist with this. Now more than ever, we have this unique opportunity to accelerate learning and to make up for that lost instructional time due to COVID-19. And it's a top priority, it's a top focus for everyone, families, schools, community organizations. And it's even called out in the Indiana Learning Recovery Plan from the Department of Education. Specifically called out are this thing called ecosystems. And the ecosystem is, as called out in the Department of Ed's Indiana Learning Recovery Plan, is support within communities that meet the needs of the whole child and address the inequalities that have had a spotlight turned on them due to the pandemic, and also to ensure that equitable access for all. Transforming teaching and learning through STEM ecosystems can strengthen and support this work. STEM teaching and learning goes beyond the transfer of knowledge, and it engages students and equips them with all those skills we've been talking about, but not only in school, but for the workplace, for your community, and also for the global economy. The development of what we call STEM ecosystems, just like it's called out in the plan, they're really movements. It can be a local or regional STEM ecosystem. And we can do some work with you at STEM Synergy through keeping in a learning and what we offer through that site and through professional development to help you look at that for your school district, locale, region, etc. It's really about that cross-sector learning. It's about offering young people access to STEM-rich and learning environments so that they can develop those important skills and engage in not only the content, but also in the activities with workforce development so it can take them to that next level. I did stick out a poll question before the session several weeks ago. Don't worry if you didn't see it or didn't answer it. It's not a big deal. But it was really to get you thinking and asking questions of your district. So if you did say yes to this in the poll question, or could say yes to it now, then tell me how in the chat. And the question is it currently in your plan to utilize ESSER funds to support STEM teaching and learning? And it may be an I don't know or a no. And if it's an I don't know or a no, then we need to find out. We need to ask those questions of our district leadership and whoever is making those decisions to take a look at that. If you're watching this as a recorded session, please take a few moments to think about this and maybe do some research on your own. Have some conversation with your leadership to say, how are we using this? Is STEM integrated? And remember, you may not know, because remember that RACI chart, because your role is not necessarily to be in the know, but it's okay to ask those questions of your leadership. So current STEM opportunities, this is where we're going to dive in for the last 20 minutes. The current STEM opportunities are just crazy right now for funding. Like I said, we currently sit in possibly the best fiscal opportunity ever in education because of the massive amounts of funding that have come down from the feds to the states and then ultimately out to the LEAs, to the districts and the schools. There's also additional state dollars that we'll talk about that you can harness for STEM as well. But within these funding avenues that are out there and available right now, there's so many ways to link in and support STEM efforts that we really have to look at, some specifically that have larger amounts of money. So today we're going to really hone in on ESSER, but we are going to touch on some of the state funding as well, because new money, amazing opportunities, and lots of ways to tie in STEM. So ESSER allocations. You may not have heard the term ESSER depending on kind of what your role is, but I'm just going to give a little bit of kind of the nuts and bolts of where that came from. So it was from the American Rescue Plan Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief. So that's what ESSER stands for, Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief. ESSER. That first part, American Rescue Plan, if you hear people say ARP, ESSER, then that's what that American Rescue Plan is ARP. So lots of acronyms, right? That's what we do in federal government, state government, we make acronyms. So under this ARP, American Rescue Plan, they created this Elementary Secondary School Emergency Relief, or ESSER, from the federal government. So it was an act from 2021, and if you're interested, Public Law 117-2, it was enacted. This ESSER ARP piece, which is the third section of ESSER, is what we're going to hone in on because of the timeline of it, and I'll explain that here in a second. But that part, so the third part of ESSER, it was released or enacted in March 11th of 2021, and it provides nearly $122 billion from the federal government down to the states, and then ultimately out to the school districts. And it was focused on helping safely reopen and sustain safe operations of schools, and then also to address the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the nation's students in lots of different ways. In addition to this ARP ESSER $122 billion, they had additional monies for specific areas. So they also, in addition to that, had some additional acts that had $3 billion additional dollars for special education, $850 million for outlying areas, $2.75 billion for non-public schools. And then there was additional funding on top of that specific to homeless children and youth, tribal education agencies, Native Hawaiians, and Alaska Natives. So lots of money, lots of ways to use it across different populations, from just ESSER, what I call ESSER 3 or ARP ESSER, that was in March. So if you look at what I have on your slide here, you can see the left-hand column is the state total ESSER allocation. You can see it broken down by 1, 2, and 3, right? So there was the first release allocation, and we're going to talk about the dates on this in just a second here, that you can see in the top row. The middle row is ESSER 2, and ESSER 3 that we're talking about right now is on the bottom row. These are just Indiana numbers. Okay, so this is not for the whole federal release of $122 billion. This is just what Indiana got. So you can see in the left-hand column, In ESSER 1, the amount they got, Indiana got. ESSER 2, the amount Indiana got. ESSER 3, just under $2 billion for ESSER 3. So then when you move over to the middle section, this is the minimum LEA allocation. So what that means is the state received the first column of funds. This is the minimum that they have to move to the local districts. Okay, so the local education agencies, LEAs. So they have to move over at least just under $1.8 billion out to the schools, required in the federal legislation, required, right? That's just, we're just talking about ESSER 3. Then if you go over to the third column where it says SEA set aside amount, that is your state education agency, SEA. Okay, so that's your set aside. So there is a maximum set aside that that like the DOE can keep for the work to be done, to whether it's reporting, because there's lots of reporting with federal dollars, whether it's, you know, reporting or their team or their staffing, or how they can keep a set aside, and that's the maximum amount that they can keep. So they can only keep just under what is that, 200 million of the almost 2 billion. So those are set by the federal government. Okay, so those are really pretty good numbers, because oftentimes you see where state agencies can keep a larger amount. They said, you know what, we want this money pushed out. So you can see those numbers there. I want to click on one of these allocations as well. If anyone wants to stick into the chat box a district that they're from, or just unmute yourself. I don't know if you can unmute yourself, and tell me what district. In the slides, and you have access to these slides in the HOA app, you can go and pull up a PDF, but it will you can actually click on those links still. So if I look at just ESSER 3, which is here, and I click on that link, it's going to pull up all the allocations for the state of Indiana by district. So these are by corporation number. So just for sake of time, I live in Yorktown, which is by Muncie. So I'm just going to go to that just because I live here. So right here is Yorktown's allocation. Okay, this is just ESSER 3. Remember this, there was ESSER 1, there was ESSER 2, and then this is just the ESSER 3 allocation. So Yorktown Community Schools, this is the amount that they received right here. Okay, so just under 2 million. I live right next to Muncie Schools. They received almost 25 million. Again, because different populations of students, higher number of students, different needs, etc. Okay, so there's a specific formula that's used. We're not going to talk about that, but to determine those allocations. And then Daleville's also next to us. So you can kind of see how it ranges based off of the needs and the numbers of the school, the size of the school district, etc. So this is an interesting link if you're unaware of how much your district got. Again, this is just ESSER 3. You can link to ESSER 2 from the slides, and you can also go to the Department of Ed site and pull up the ESSER 1 allocations if you would like to. But you can go through here and see what your district and other districts received. There's so much money out there. You can see some of the larger districts here, like here's Gary Community Schools. We could find IPS in here just by looking at a large number. South Bend is a large number. Vigo County. Yeah, so really interesting, I think, to look through here, but also great information to have for your own district. So I definitely say check that out. Okay, so looking again at those 3 ESSER funds, I wanted to pull this up just so you can see what is supposed to be funded out of the different ones. There's 3, we know there's lots of money, but why are we funding this out of this? Or why can't we fund this out of that? So as you can see here, and the green arrows kind of indicate what's listed here in this chart for ESSER 1. So, and you can see the dates there, ESSER 1 dates and ESSER 2 dates, those 2 amounts of those 2 buckets of money. They have the same dates. You'll notice that it goes back to 3/13 of 2020, which is really the very beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. And it was kind of that spring break time when everything was hitting, schools were shutting down, people were getting sick, chaos, right? So they were, even though this ESSER fund wasn't released till much later, they said, hey, you can go back, districts, and you can spend dollars or look at your expenditures that you had to spend back then because you were in crisis mode and you were trying to figure out what you were going to do, provide technology, do all these things because all of a sudden schools are shutting down because of Corona. And so you had to dip into your general fund or into other funding streams. And so now, hey, here's these dollars, you can go back and reimburse yourself essentially. So that's really what ESSER 1 fund was used for. And then some of ESSER 2. You'll notice though, in those green arrows indicate the what, like they could use the funds for, it grew on itself. So what that means is, like in ESSER 1, you can see there it was for preventing, preparing for, and responding to COVID. It's pretty broad, right? But that then also is allowable as an expenditure under ESSER 2, and then ESSER 2 expanded it. So it allowed additionally hiring new staff, avoiding layoffs. So when you think about layoffs in school and how those funds are used, we're not just talking about teachers and administrators and contract employees, but we're talking about our custodial staff, our kitchen staff, our secretarial staff, staff that may not be under that union contract, but they still don't want to be laid off and they don't want to lay them off. So they dipped into their own general fund to try to find ways, or other funding means to try to find ways to keep them from getting laid off. ESSER 2 helped to relieve some of that on school districts. It also helped to avoid additional layoffs. Again, addressing learning losses in there, preparing them to reopen, because that timeline of when ESSER 2 was released was kind of in the midst of some schools were going back, some weren't, some were hybrid. So that was really to try to figure out all of those pieces mid-pandemic. Then we have the release of ESSER 3. So in ESSER 3, you can do everything you could do with ESSER 2, and you could do everything you could do with ESSER 1, and then some. The two big points that I want to hit on within these ESSER 3 funds, which again, your district is writing and applying right now and saying, here's how much we get, here's what we want to do with it. They have to reserve 20% of what they are going to receive of their allocation for learning loss. And there are options in there in terms of through implementation of evidence-based interventions, such as, but it's still broad. So they list a such as summer learning, comprehensive after-school programs, extended day, extended school year, etc. But that's not it. So you really can dream and scheme here for that 20%. So your district has to take their overall allocation. They have to set aside 20% and put a plan together to address learning loss. But you can be very creative and innovative around what you're going to do with that 20% to address learning loss. The second thing I want to hit is that you have to make sure within that 20% that you are addressing interventions specific, obviously, to academic and SEL, social emotional, but you have to focus in, hone in on those students that were disproportionately affected or impacted by COVID and those underrepresented subgroups of students. So you have to break out your race and ethnicity, your socioeconomic, your homeless student population, your migrant population. You have to look at all of those subgroups, right? So the subgroups you report up to the state, subgroups you report up to the feds, you have to break that down and say, not only do we have to set aside 20%, but within that 20%, what are the innovative, creative things that we're going to do that we always have dreamed and schemed of doing to really make sustainable change? And then how are we addressing this underrepresented population of students in subgroups? Okay, so you could still do what was under 2 and 1, but there's this whole new focus and you have to use 20% towards this specific initiative. I know that's a lot. Okay, so I want you to just think through, we're not going to do a chat in the discussion because we're coming down on the time, but I want you to be thinking about these are actually things from the Department of Education about ways to discuss or think about how you can use these ESSER dollars. After school programming, continued learning, additional tutoring, early learning, innovative school curricular designs. Maybe it's redesigning your curriculum map or creating a curriculum map that is new and innovative with a new schedule that you're creating. So there's so many things you can do. So these are all kinds of things that they want you to think about as it relates to how you can use the dollars. Linking it back to STEM, you can use and think about all of these things as it relates to the development of ecosystems, going through the STEM, Indiana specific STEM needs assessment and identifying your gaps and figuring out, okay, if we're going to do this and we're going to do it well, how do we address this through a lens of STEM, and then providing that professional development and support around that. I'm not going to dive in deeply to the Indiana STEM Needs Assessment today, but again, it's something that I'll touch on at the end as an offering that we can do through Keep Indiana Learning to offer additional support to you, your school, your district. So it's really about showing me where the money is, right?
I need to feel you, Jerry! Show me the money! Jerry, you better yell! Show me the money!
So where is it? So within ESSER, if I'm looking at how I actually allocate the funds, this gets a little deep, but within an actual expenditure report, this shows you in the green highlighted box where to put it. Okay, so this is where I would suggest to embed STEM. If you're looking at that 20% set aside within ESSER 3 and how you're going to write it into your title application, this is it. This is where you embed it. Okay, this is also where you have the conversation. So remember that Rossi chart, Racy chart. Maybe you're the one that's like, I'm not really the one that makes these decisions, but that'd be great. Okay, you can still have the conversations. And now you have the knowledge to take and say, what are we putting in this expenditure category? We know we have this amount of money. We know we have to set aside 20% for these things within ESSER 3. We want to include STEM, and we know you can do it, and it's right here. So have the conversations with your district. Talk about the 20% set aside, and talk about how you can embed that STEM funding within this particular component. I mentioned that I was going to say something about state funding. Okay, so we've talked a lot about ESSER funding, specifically ESSER 3, because it's hot right now and there's a lot of funding and it's happening right now in actual live, happenings. But there are state allocations. Works a little bit different because it's not just a formula-based allocation where every district gets a certain amount, but it's usually through a grant application in some capacity, right? So my point here being, there is a significant amount of funding out there just for the state of Indiana that came down from our legislature in the last session, which was a biennium. So it was every 2 year they do money, right? So within that, they had, back in 2017, they had allocated $2 million. And then in 2019, they re-upped that. And then in 2021, they really put their money where their mouth was and said, you know what, we are going to add to each of these line items for STEM additional funds. So the biennium is basically state funding that covers 2 years, right? So in this 2021 session, you can see here, there are 3 separate specific line items within the budget for the state of, for the state of Indiana that go to either the Department of Education or to the Commission for Higher Ed, which is what CHE stands for, specific to STEM. Now there's some language in there that say like, well, you have to take this amount and put it towards this amount towards this. So for example, the STEM Program Alignment Fund, $8.5 million. It's pretty significant. For state funding, that's pretty significant. So $8.5 million from the state legislature, from the state budget, is going to what's called the State Program Alignment Fund, flows to the Department of Education, so they oversee it. Some of that money will stay at the state level, I'm guessing. However, the majority, from my experience at the state, the majority is going to get pushed out to the states or to the LEAs, to the local districts through a grant application. Some of the language in there is specific to supporting a STEM needs assessment, something that we offer through Keep Indiana Learning and the STEM Synergy team. And it's Indiana specific. Offer STEM professional development, robotics, AP support, right? Another $6 million to the Department of Ed for the next level computer science program. That's specific to computer science, obviously. And then there's $10 million to the Commission for Higher Ed. And they have specifics that they're going to use for that for too. They typically release an RFP. It's out there right now for application due the 9th. And I know that's work that we're also applying for to try to help support schools. Lots of money, $24.5 million just from the state of Indiana, from the state legislature to support STEM. So another great way to dip in and use that money to support the STEM that you're wanting to do within your school districts or classrooms. So STEM Synergy, here for the last just couple minutes before we close out. What is it that we can do within STEM Synergy, which is kind of the piece under Keeping and Learning umbrella for STEM? It's not on their website yet. It'll go live in July. I'll be the one leading that work, but there's lots of support that we can provide you. Okay, so we can help you have the conversations with your district leaders or building leaders. Or your board. We can help you to have the conversation around what are they doing with the 20% set aside? How are they developing a plan for innovative learning recovery programs? Where's STEM? Developing a sustainability plan. So beyond that 20%, once these funds go away, then we can help you to develop that plan on how you're going to sustain that as well. Ecosystem development, we talked about that. Indiana STEM needs assessment development, completion, support, resources, professional development. Lots and lots that we can do. We offer a lot of free monthly professional development, so check that out on the Keep Indiana Learning website under STEM Synergy, which will go live in July. But we also have some pay options for some additional professional learning that will continue out through first semester. So please check that out. So thank you so much. My time is just about up, and I am going to I don't know if Diane needs to say a few words or not about the evaluation, but just a reminder, thank you so much. And please take time to fill out that evaluation and connect with me. My email address is there. My Twitter handle is there. You can go to the Keep Indiana Learning website and reach me through that as well. Sign up for our newsletters that's coming soon. Again, the website will first, STEM Synergy is going to go live on Keep Indiana Learning site in July. So please access that and reach out for some additional support. We'd love to help you. Thanks so much.
Amanda, thank you so much. Wow, talk about a lot of information. I think what's beautiful about this is that it's recorded. This recording should show up in the next 24 to 48 hours, and people can watch it and catch anything that they missed. So thank you so much for your expertise. And as Amanda mentioned, there is in the documents section, link to Amanda's listing in the agenda. There's a feedback form, and we would love for you to please fill that out. And that is what will generate your PGP points. And I think that's it for the day. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the conference, and thank you for your time and joining us for this session. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.
Have a great one.
You too.
Bye.